Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I have my November wrap up for you. I did do a mid-month wrap up again this month, so I will have that link down below. If you want to see all the books that I read in the first half of the month, this is going to be all the books I read in the second half of the month. The second half was definitely a lot better in like the quantity of books that I read. I don't know that the quality was necessarily better. I've been sort of in like this weird reading slump kind of mood lately, so nothing has really been vibing for me. But that's just kind of where I'm at right now, so let's get into the books. So I did kind of want to just put this out there in this video. I am going to be attempting Bookmas this year. I believe Haley in Bookland is the person who started that, so like obviously all the credit to her for that. But I've seen a couple people do this and it just seemed kind of fun, and I know I've attempted Vlogmas in the past back before I was doing book videos, and it never really worked out for me. I would get to like day 7 and bail because I just couldn't keep up with it. And this I actually think is going to go a lot better because obviously I was able to pre-film a lot of these videos because they're not necessarily vlogs. And so I did want to note that, just because you may notice in this video that the lighting is actually quite a bit better than it has been in a number of my previous videos. I have been having a lot of issues with lighting lately. I've had a ring light for probably about 3 years now, I think, and that's all I've been using. And that's fine in the sense that like you can see me in the videos, but I found I was really unhappy with how the bookshelves behind me were looking. Like even this one I find now still looks a little darker than I would like, but I actually bought 2 new lights on Black Friday or Cyber Monday or whatever it was, and I actually really love them. So going forward the lighting will be better. I know there are some videos that I've already pre-filmed for Bookmas that don't have so great lighting, so I apologize in advance for that, but basically going forward everything that I film will have much better lighting. So that's very exciting because it's obviously getting dark very early right now. Like it's currently 4 o'clock when I'm filming this and it's already dark outside, so obviously like my filming window is getting smaller and smaller. So this is very exciting because now I can film whenever I want. So anyway, that's like my little spiel of obviously doing Bookmas. There's going to be a video every day in December. Like I said, I've already filmed a lot of them, so I'm not anticipating sort of bailing on day 7 because I've already pre-filmed almost all of them. I have probably about 10 left to film, but I'm hoping to get to those over the next couple days. And so with that being said, let's just get right into the books that I read at the end of November. So like I mentioned, I've been in kind of like a reading slump, and because of that I have stopped writing down like summaries of the books I read, which is not something I'm super happy about. I have this book, it's literally like jam-packed full of stuff. Like all of these papers are just notes for like videos that I've done, and then like actually written in here is just like the summaries of every book that I've read over the last year and a half basically. And I always write like a half page after every single book, just sort of so that I don't forget what happens in it when I go to recommend it. But I have fallen behind on that. I'm like 15 books behind. None of these books were written down, so honestly some of them I already don't really remember what happened, so I'm sorry. But the first book I read was Maybe Not by Colleen Hoover. This is the little novella that goes after Maybe Someday. I gave Maybe Someday 5 stars when I read it. I did really enjoy it, but I think the problem was I didn't read this right after that one, so I think I gave this like 3.5 stars maybe, and it wasn't bad, but it also doesn't follow the same characters as the first book, so I was very confused because that one I actually did have like notes for, but I hadn't mentioned anything about these side characters. All of my notes were about the main couple, and so I didn't really know like whose story I was reading. This was like, I think it's the roommates from the first book, or one of the roommates, and how they sort of meet and end up together. But it was okay. I feel like I might have liked it more if I had read it right after the first book. I wish I hadn't taken that gap. And I was sort of planning on rereading Maybe Someday before I got to these. But what sort of happened was I took the loan out from the library from Maybe Now, which is the second full book in the series. And it was expiring like that day. And so I was like, okay, I have to read this now because I don't want to go back on the wait list. And so I ended up reading the novella and the book, and like I said, it probably would have been better if I had gone back and read Maybe Someday first, because I would have sort of figured out where we were in the story, because I was definitely a little bit lost. But I think I gave both of these 3.5 stars just because they were good, but I didn't really care. I don't know if that, like I said, was a product of me having waited so long or what was up with that, but I didn't love these. They were okay. I, like I said, did love Maybe Someday though, so maybe read that one. Next was What Was Meant to Be by QB Tyler. QB Tyler is one of those authors for me that just never misses. Like, I've given every single one of her books either 4 or 5 stars. I absolutely love them. They're all super crazy, taboo, very spicy romances. Really, really love them. Like I said, they're always good. This one follows a girl who ends up dating her godfather. So it's like her parents' best friend. Like, her parents and this guy went to college together and they were like inseparable, and then the two ended up getting married, and he has like stayed their best friend over all these years, but he sort of developed this relationship with their daughter. Obviously nothing happens in that regard until she's over 18, like she is legal in the book and everything, but obviously they're like trying to hide it from the parents for a while and things like that. And I just really love these books. Like I said, I gave this one 4.5 stars, and I put this in my review. I said that I want to say it would have been 5 stars, but for whatever reason I put this down at one point. I think I had to like do some work or whatever. I put it down and it ended up being like 2 days or something before I picked it back up again. And I think because of that gap, it made it feel like the book was longer than it was. So I felt like it was a little too long, but I think that probably was me. But other than that, I really, really love this one. It was probably the only book I think I read this month that I actually can say I really, really loved and would consider purchasing. But like I said, all of QB Tyler's books are really, really good. So that was sort of why I picked this one up, was like hoping that it would get me out of my sort of slumpy mood and actually get me to like something. So I did enjoy this one, but it didn't really fix my reading slump. Next was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I have been seeing a lot of good things about this one. It's a small town romance, which is obviously like very, very sort of, I don't want to say like trendy, but I feel like it's very in right now. Like, everybody's talking about the small town romances. And that's always been sort of right up my alley. I love, like, especially the ones that take place in like a beach town or like a cottage sort of area. Like, I live for those romances. And this one is one of those ones where the girl is, you know, from a very rich family, and she has a very high paying job, and she lives in the city, and she ends up meeting this country guy who is running this bed and breakfast, and their two worlds sort of collide. And I did enjoy this one. I think I gave it 4 stars. I think my big sort of issue with this one was that I just had seen it hyped up so much that I was expecting it to be like something super insane and crazy and different, and like it was good, but it wasn't like groundbreaking or super, super memorable. Like I said, I didn't write down anything about these books, and just thinking of this one off the top of my head, like I can remember a few moments, but like I honestly can't even tell you how this book ended, and I know I listened to the ending. I was surprised that this one did not make it to the top 10 of the Goodreads Choice Awards for romance, because I 100% thought it was going to, so that was kind of wild. But like I said, I did enjoy this one. I just think my expectations were too high. Next was Beyond the Wand by Tom Felton. This is obviously Tom Felton's like memoir, and if you don't know, he is the guy who played Draco Malfoy in the Harry Potter series, and so I was sort of interested in picking this one up just because of that. And it was good. I will say I've run into this issue twice this month with memoirs that I read, where I don't know why, but if you get the audiobook, the foreword isn't there. Like, this book was forwarded by Emma Watson, wasn't in the audiobook at all, and I read another book that it was the same way, and I don't know why they're doing that. But if you are someone who is looking at one of these memoirs and you want to read the foreword, definitely get the ebook or something, because the audiobook just doesn't have it, which I think is so weird that you would have a published copy of the book that didn't include basically the entire book. And so it's just something to note that was kind of annoying me with these books. I think I gave this one 4 stars. I always hate reading memoirs because I feel like you don't want to be like, oh, I hated when this happened in it, because it's like literally this person's life. Like, you can't be like, oh, I think you should have taken out chapter 42 because it didn't fit with the plot line, because like that's not, you know, what it is. Like, I find they're very hard to read. And this one I did enjoy. I will say that I found the last 2 chapters, maybe 3 chapters, were kind of out of place. And like I said, I don't want to like say things like that because obviously it's his life and that's the turn it took. But I felt like the whole book was very sort of lighthearted and fun and just sort of like very behind the scenes-esque, I guess. And then all of a sudden we were like in this very serious place. And I just felt like that was sort of a weird transition. But like I said, again, it's his life. Like, you can't really change that. But like I said, I did enjoy this one. Probably not going to purchase it just because I don't think it's something that I would ever revisit or reread, but I did enjoy it. Next was Love in the Time of Serial Killers by Alicia Thompson. This one was a 3-star read for me. I was pretty disappointed in this one actually, because I had been on the hold for this, for the audiobook from my library since before Halloween, because I thought this would be like a fun spooky season read, and I wasn't getting it, and I kind of just accepted the fact that I was never gonna get it, because the way my library works is I have access to 5 libraries, but only one is for my city. So if I put a hold on a book at one of the other cities, if someone from that city puts a hold on it after me, they get moved ahead of me in line. So I just seem to constantly get bumped to the end of the line for this book, and I was like, okay, I'm never gonna get it. My library didn't have the audiobook, so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna buy it, and I bought the physical copy, and literally 2 days later, I got the audiobook hold. And so I did listen to the audio, and it was okay. This is sort of like, the synopsis is that this girl is obsessed with serial killers, and she thinks her neighbor is a serial killer, but she ends up dating him. But I found that that wasn't played out as much as I was hoping. Like, there's literally maybe like 1 or 2 scenes where she's like, oh, that thing he's doing is kind of shady, and then it just like moves on, and then most of the book was just about her talking about her dissertation about serial killers. And I found that really boring, because honestly, I'm not someone who ever wants to or plans to write a dissertation. So reading about someone else doing it was just like a good reminder of why I would never do that. But also I was like, this is so boring. Like, I wouldn't want to be living this, so why would I want to read it, I guess. And so this one definitely like didn't live up to what I was expecting. I'm kind of sad I bought the physical copy, to be honest, because I don't think it's one I'll ever revisit. But it was like an okay book, I guess. Next, if you've been on my channel for a while, you'll notice that when I sort of get in slumpy moods, I tend to pick up these series that are very sort of trashy. They're like very dramatic, very over the top, like things that would never ever happen in real life. But I tend to pick those up when I'm in a slump, because I find they're just entertaining, and that's really all I'm looking for, like, at that point, to get me out of the slump. And so I tend to pick those up, and the next book I picked up was The Initiation by Nikki Sloane. And this one I feel like I had seen around a lot, that it was sort of like, you know, one of those trashy, overdramatic series. So I was like, okay, I'll pick it up. There's 4 books, or actually I think there's more than 4 books out, but my library only has 4. So I was like, there's only 4 books, like, I'll read them, it's fine. And I started this first one, and it was okay. And then I started the second one, which was The Deception, which was also okay. But then I got to the third one, The Obsession, and I kind of felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. Like, the first book is basically about this girl who ends up sort of being arranged marriage to this guy, but then throughout the course of the 3 books, she sort of ends up being forced to be with his dad too. Like, it's so weird, and like, that is so like a terrible way to explain that, but that's sort of what happens, is she's like kind of with the dad, and she's kind of with him, and I feel like there was no reason for her to be in love with the son. Like, she kept going like, oh, I'm always gonna come back to the son, like, he's the one I want to be with, he's the one that I married, like, blah blah, and like, they never did anything other than like hook up. Like, I didn't understand how she was like, oh yeah, we're in love with each other, and like, literally the first time they meet for like 5 minutes at a party, and he's like, oh, you should save yourself for me, and she's like, okay, like, cool, and that's just like how it goes. And I was like kind of confused as to why they even liked each other. Like, they literally met for 5 minutes, and then they were like, yes, we're meant to be together. And I don't know, it was a little over the top for me. I gave the first 2 books 3 stars. I gave the last one that I read 2 stars, just because I was bored. I felt like nothing was really happening by the 3rd book. Like, we were just repeating the same thing over and over again, and we were getting absolutely nowhere. And so I just kind of gave up on this one, which was sad, because I was hoping that this might help me get out of the slump too. But I just haven't been vibing with anything, which is really, really frustrating, especially when I'm trying to film these Bookmas videos, because obviously, like, there are still some books I have to read for some of these videos, and because of that, there are like a certain number of books that I have to get to, and the fact that I'm not liking any of them is not going well. These books weren't for a video or anything, but I was hoping they would get me back in the reading mood, and they just didn't. Next, I read the After graphic novel, which probably wasn't the best move, but I had checked it out from the library, and I was like, you know what, it's probably only going to take me like an hour or 2 to get through this, because it's only 196 pages, and it's a graphic novel, so like, obviously you read it very quickly. So I sat down one night and was like, okay, I'm just going to finish this, and it was not great, but I think honestly I'm just really past my After phase of life. After was a big deal for me when I first read it, because it was the first big romance series I ever read. It was also the first like non-YA romance that I had ever read, and so it was like a whole new world was opened up to me with those books. Like, I had no idea that books like that even existed, like that there were like college age romance books out there. I always thought growing up that the only romance books that existed were like the ones I would see my grandmother reading, like with the dukes and stuff on the front, and I was just like, you know what, that's not really my thing, and I just kind of assumed that that was the entire romance genre. Granted, I was not a big reader as a kid either, so the odds of me ever discovering those books were like so slim. But like I said, after it was like a big deal for me, like that's what started my booktube channel almost, was like reading those books and becoming obsessed with them, and then wanting more books like that was what led me down this whole rabbit hole to being here and having all these shelves, and that's just how it all started. And so I feel like I wanted to try the graphic novel. I wasn't sure. I did buy it actually, like I pre-ordered it last year and I ended up returning it because I was like, you know what, I don't need to own this. And I'm glad I did, because it was, like, it's on Book Outlet now, you can get it for like $7. And so I'm glad I did return that, because if I ever did want to own it, I would just buy it from Book Outlet. But I didn't love this. I found that if you've read After, you know that there's a lot of back and forth between Hardin and Tessa, where they're like together and then they're not, and then she hates him and then she loves him, and it's like a whole thing. And I found that because this was condensed into a graphic novel, I found that it just seemed so quick. Like it was like 2 pages of them being together and then her being like, I hate you, leave me alone, and then it was 2 pages of them together and then her being like, I hate you again, and it just felt almost like whiplashy, like you were going back and forth so quickly because it's so much smaller than the actual story. And there were some parts that I just found, because it's been like 2 years since I read After, I found that there were parts that even as someone who was familiar with the story that I wasn't really getting. Like there's a part where she apologizes to Landon, I think, being like, oh, I'm sorry that I didn't tell you that me and Hardin were together, and I was like, when did you guys get together? Like, did I miss that? Like, they weren't official to me reading the graphic novel, and I don't know if that was just like you were supposed to assume that because they were sleeping together that they were official, but I was kind of like, whoa, I didn't know you were together, and then it was just weird to me, and I could see someone who hadn't read the original book being very easily confused, because there was things like that where they didn't really say like, oh, they're together, and then all of a sudden they were breaking up, and you were like, how do you break up when you're not even together? It was just really weird. I gave this 3 stars. I don't know that I'll continue on with the rest of them, because honestly I think I'm over it. I really do, like, my After phase is come and gone, and I'll obviously always be grateful for that because it was such an important part to me ending up here, but I just don't think it's something that I want to continue reading. Next was The American Roommate Experiment by Elena Armas. This one is for one of my Bookmas videos, so I'm not going to go too in-depth into it, but I hated this one. I actually hated this one more than I hated The Spanish Love Deception, and I really did not like The Spanish Love Deception. But it was just very long and very boring. I should have known when I saw that the audiobook was 15 hours long that I was going to hate it, but I was willing to give it a shot, and it really let me down. There was not one memorable moment from this entire book. Like, I can't even tell you what happened in it other than this guy and this girl accidentally become roommates. Like, that's literally all I remember after 15 hours of audiobook listening, and I just did not like this. I gave it 2 stars. Like I said, didn't like it. You'll hear more about it in a future video. Next I read Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. This is Matthew Perry's memoir. This is the other one I was talking about that the foreword is not included in the audiobook. So the foreword in this one is done by Lisa Kudrow, and that is not in the audiobook, so I didn't get to listen to that part or hear that part or read that part, which was kind of frustrating. Like I said, like I don't know why they exclude that, because to me that's part of the book, but it was not in there. This one was really hard for me to rate. I originally gave it 3 stars, and then I think I made it 3.5, and then I was playing around with 4, and then I just I didn't know how to rate it because it's a very sad book. Obviously this book deals a lot with his addictions. It's called Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, so you would think like the Friends obviously implies that there's going to be some talk of his time on Friends, but honestly that was like very, very minimal in this book. Like there was hardly anything. I can't even think of like one fun fact off the top of my head that he mentioned from Friends. Like the only thing that stuck with me was how he was like, oh, watch Friends at the end of season 3 and see how skinny I was. That's because I was on drugs and whatever. And that's like all that stuck with me, and now I almost feel like if I were to watch Friends again, that's all I would be thinking is, oh look, that's when he was on the drugs again, and like, oh look, then he gained the weight, and like whatever. Like I feel like that's what I would be doing. So if you're gonna watch Friends regularly, I probably wouldn't read this because I do feel like it might taint the show a little bit. But there wasn't a ton about that. There was some like lovers content about his like failed relationships, and then a ton about his addiction, obviously, which was like the main focal point of the book. But I just found that, and I think the only reason I noticed this is because another review pointed it out before I even started the book, so I was already aware of this. There is not really a single woman that he brings up, other than maybe like his mother, in this book that he does not mention sleeping with or wanting to sleep with. And I just felt like that was like really weird. Like, I've never read something where they were like, oh, I met this woman on this set and then I wanted to sleep with her, and then like, oh, I tried to get with this one but she didn't want me, and like whatever. Like, it was always about him sleeping with these women, and I was just like, was there any woman that you came across that you didn't want to sleep with other than his, I think it was his assistant. He makes a point to point out that she was gay, so that's why she was the perfect assistant, because he wouldn't want to sleep with her. And I don't know, I just thought that that was kind of strange, but like I said, it's probably because I read that other review before I read it that I was just more aware of that than I would have been otherwise. Next, I read Mr. Wrong Number by Lynn Painter. Lynn Painter wrote Better Than the Movies, which is a YA book that I read recently and really, really loved. And this one was pretty good. It's one of those ones where they're texting each other, but they don't know that it's each other, and they know each other in real life because this guy is her brother's roommate and she is living with them right now. And this guy has always been irritated by her and is like annoyed that she's there and all this stuff, and she can't stand him, but they are texting each other and not realizing that it's each other, obviously. And this one was cute. I gave it 4 stars. I did enjoy it. It wasn't like anything super special or unique, but it was good enough for what it was, and I did like it, and I would maybe revisit it at some point. Lastly was Better Than Fiction by Alexa Martin. This one I actually thought was pretty good. This one I gave 4 stars, and I sort of feel like maybe this is me getting out of my sort of reading slump, but I also did DNF a book after this, so maybe not. But I picked this one up because I saw Jessica from Peace Love Books talking about this one, and I have read this author's sports, like football series, and I did enjoy that. I didn't end up finishing that one because the last one didn't have the best reviews, but I did enjoy the 3 that I read, and so I was curious to see what she was going to do with like a bookstore sort of setting. And I did enjoy this one. I think it was sort of interesting because I feel like the setting in a romance book of one of them being a bookstore owner is very, not like overdone necessarily, but it's done a lot. It's very common, I find. And I think that a lot of times that lends itself to certain characters. Like, you expect them to be like obsessed with books and, you know, super excited about owning this bookstore and whatever. And so I thought this one was unique in that this girl hates books, she doesn't like reading, and she's inherited this bookstore and she doesn't really want it, but she's sort of keeping it running for her grandmother's like legacy, basically. And she ends up dating this romance author who comes in for an event, and so she just thinks this guy is like so ridiculous the first time. She thinks romance books are kind of stupid, and she thinks that he's gonna be like super boring, but all these old ladies in the store want him to come in because they're obsessed with his books. So he comes in, he does his event, and they end up sort of talking and getting to know each other a little bit, and he's actually sticking around the town to write his next book, so he's gonna be around quite a bit. And this one was really good. Like I said, I was surprised. I gave this one 4 stars. I did enjoy it. I thought it was a different take on the bookstore shop owner, which I did really enjoy. And I thought the guy was really cool as well. Again, like, being a romance author as a guy is not a common thing in the books. Usually it's the woman in the books that is the romance author, so I thought that was an interesting sort of twist as well. And so I did really enjoy that one. So, like I said, I did end up sort of DNFing a book. I recently started the Atlas 6, and I was reading it for a video that I'm doing for Bookmas, and I couldn't wrap my head around it right now. I actually was just reading this last night, and I couldn't do it. I got about halfway through when I realized that I had no idea what was going on. I had pretty much zoned out for the entire first half of the book, and I just was not in a place where I could keep track of what was happening. There's like 6 different audiobook narrators for that, and there's 6 different perspectives, and it was just all like just too much for me right now. So I actually have sort of DNF'd that one for now, but I do think I'll come back to it at some point. And I ended up picking up Mary Jane, which I cannot think of the author's name. I know it's Jessica something, but I'll put it on the screen so you can see what that one looks like. I'm currently reading that one. I'm about 36% in. That's like the replacement book for the Atlas 6 in that video I want to do. So that's like, I feel like those 2 books are like a huge hint on what video that is. But anyway, that is everything that I have read in November. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. Like I said, I will be doing a new video every single day for the entire month of December, which obviously will be starting tomorrow. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.